Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel, where we delve into the mind of a villain. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Wenwu, the antagonist from Shang and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Wenwu's tale was not unlike a Shakespearean tragedy, with his fatal flaw of his unresolved grief eventuating in him bringing out his own demise. From a militant conqueror to a grieving widow, he was a character that underwent a change in our perception as an audience. He starts off as a man of much evil, being driven by an insatiable greed for wealth and power. Combined with the fact that he was the most powerful man on earth with a morality that was willing to take lives, Wenwu was quite simply a mass murderer, and over the course of human history, he has the highest kill count for a human in the MCU. This greed, however, doesn't get dampened by the passage of time due to the immortality from the Ten Rings. Wenwu is an old man, but one who never learnt the lessons afforded from having to face death one day. Things take a turn when he meets his wife, a woman that he would be willing to leave it all behind for. Perhaps Wenwu did have some lovers in the past, but if there were, none were impactful enough to convince him to forsake his life of exploits before they themselves succumb to decay of time. But with his wife, Wenwu has something he has never had before, an equal. It is her ability to stand up to him and even humiliate him that endears him to her. On top of that, she also offers him something out of his grasp, a new identity and a way to leave behind his blood-stained past. Wenwu appears to be a man who has his identity derived from his actions, and more importantly from the name that others give him. In his passive approach, he looks to others for his self-identity. We see this in his conversation with his now grown children in the middle of the film, where he explains the importance of one's name, which gives a person their identity and connects them to their past. In his days as a conqueror, he was led to believe that that was all he was from the names that others labeled him. His relationship with his wife was a return to his roots, with her being the only one who called him by his real name. Interestingly, the name Wenwu means someone who is adept at both literature and martial arts, a name that fits him rather well. Credits to the channel known as Yimu for this insight. So effectively, Wenwu's wife represents a return or rediscovery of his actual self, and this results in a companionship that he would be willing to leave everything behind for. Unfortunately, the sins of his past would come back to haunt him, and tragically, his wife pays the price instead. Without her, he defaults back to his own identity as a conqueror and only finds purpose in rebuilding his empire. But to make things worse, Wenwu's quest for revenge becomes another complication in his life and the lives of his children. The men who took his wife's life were no doubt committing an evil deed, but it bears noting that they were acting in retaliation to the pain that Wenwu himself first inflicted on them. Now obviously, the notion of an eye for an eye would only lead to further misery, and this becomes a source of misery for him and his family. To quote Wenwu after his attack at the gambling tables, he tells his young son that a blood debt must be repaid in blood. If that were true, then perhaps Wenwu should have let bygones be bygones in the first place, since it was his own actions that started the cycle of violence. Sadly, Wenwu chooses to perpetuate this vicious cycle, but it's made worse by the effect he has on his children, starting with a traumatic experience by how he offs someone in the face right before his son. In his grief, Wenwu appears to distance himself from his children. Granted, as someone from an Asian heritage, Wenwu would likely not be accustomed to expressing his affection in overt ways. With his daughter, he cannot bear to look at her out of her resemblance to her mother. With Shang-Chi, from his recount, it appears that he had the impression that his father's love for him was conditional on his ability as a martial artist, hence the relentless drive by which he pushes himself. But despite this, there are brief moments of Wenwu's expressed love for his son, as seen in the moment when he takes the time to wipe the blood off his hands and reassure him of his future. The unfortunate aspect is that out of his anger and his desire to protect, Wenwu turns his son into a killer and neglects his daughter instead of helping them to process their grief together. Perhaps this wedge between Wenwu and his children also stems from his irrational blame of them for the death of his wife, a view that he still holds even after more than a decade. In his fight with Shang-Chi, he accuses him of just watching from his window and doing nothing while she died. From what we can observe about Wenwu, it's safe to say that he would have very much preferred if the gang chose to take away either or even both of his children instead of his wife. But his children aren't the only ones to be blamed, as Wenwu also resents the village elders for banishing his wife. Most of all, he blames himself for believing he could put his past behind him and for thinking he could live a peaceful life. However, as mentioned earlier, Wenwu doesn't take into account the fact that he was the one who drew first blood. In fact, there is no indication of any remorse over his past exploits, at least none that was shown on screen. Tragically, Wenwu's grief opens him up to deception from the dweller in the darkness, and his yearning for his wife causes him to be blind to the absurdity of his words, that his wife was still alive and imprisoned behind the village as punishment. His intentions to invade the village, while misguided to the core, are completely understandable, as he's simply trying to bring back the love of his life, a relationship so rare that he only encountered one of such in his 1,000-year existence. If any of us were in his position, being able to bring back our loved ones, we would do the same in a heartbeat. In his quest to restore his family, it's worthwhile to note that Wenwu gave his men the go-ahead to use lethal force on Shang-Chi in their effort to retrieve his pendant. He later reveals that it was an expression of the confidence he has in his son's fighting abilities. But that is a rather cold decision, given the inherent possibility, however small, that Shang-Chi would have been killed by his men. You would think that Wenwu wouldn't be comfortable with any such risk of losing another family member, especially given that he's still grieving over the loss of his wife. But more than that, if you dwell on it, Wenwu's decision to allow his son to be put to the test has the horrific implication that he would be willing to allow Shang-Chi to be killed if his fighting skills were not up to par. It could be suggested that his men were instructed to stop short of killing Shang-Chi if push came to shove. But that suggestion wouldn't really hold up. If you look at the way his men attack, most of their blows would be fatal, especially when they're initiated from a man with a glowing blade for his hand. However, in his dealings with the village, Wenwu appears to show some restraint. While he may threaten to burn down the village to the ground for denying him passage, it seems to be the full extent of the measure he is willing to take, with him leaving the villagers alive. During the attack, his men only fire weapons to immobilize the villagers and not kill them, despite his resentment towards them for not allowing him and his wife to stay there. But this restraint isn't applied to Shang-Chi though, as later in his rage, he dishes out what could be seen as lethal blows to Shang-Chi after he insults him, when he suggests that even if his mother were still alive, she wouldn't want anything to do with him in his current state. It's unlikely that at this point Wenwu would be aware that Shang-Chi would be able to survive such blows at close range, so it's suggestible that he was striking with the intention to kill. Perhaps this could be seen as his most evil act in the film. And when Shang-Chi falls into the lake and doesn't surface, he doesn't show any concern and simply heads to the cave's entrance. Before his end, there would no doubt be a plethora of emotions running through his mind, but we can only speculate from the look in his eyes. Perhaps it's a mixture of sorrow and regret, realizing that his wife was truly gone and that he had wasted the years he could have had with his children. Perhaps that look was his unspoken way of saying, "I'm sorry." There also appears to be a sense of approval over his son, especially after he sees a remembrance of his wife in him from the adoption of her fighting style. Wenwu was a man initially lost in his unending greed, but was temporarily placated by the chance of a simpler but more fulfilling life. Sadly, that life was taken from him in an act of injustice that would be a drop in the bucket compared to his evil, and the resulting grief blinded him to the only family he had left and sent him on a fool's errand. So what do you think of Wenwu from Shang-Chi, folks? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and take care.